Everyone, my name is Austin. I'm a senior product designer here at GitLab. Today, I wanted to talk specifically about the navigation of GitLab, but more specific to why we're asking you to hold back on some navigation additions just for now. And so I'm going to step through a short little slide deck, and I'm interested to see if anybody has any questions. So first to start with, like, what is navigation? What I'm showing in this visual representation here is a little bit of the dichotomy between how we see our existing structure today in GitLab, where you have this top bar, which is usually colored by the specific theme a user's chosen, as well as a left sidebar that's more contextual to where a user is in GitLab. And then there's also usually a breadcrumb, but sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So it's been hard to drill that down in navigation. What my team has been working on is overhauling the navigation experience. So we are currently midway through development to try and get this into a beta stage now. This contributes back to the ask of like hold back on some of these things because we're really busy trying to figure out these logistics. So specifically, what we're talking about changing in this overhaul is we would have a main left panel section that would act as the main navigation sidebar, and also including that breadcrumb, knowing that those two things play together importantly for helping users have their wayfinding cues, being able to switch context and understand like where they are in GitLab. So again, that's kind of where we are with what is navigation. Now, why can't I just add something? Why can't I add a new item? Let's do just a historical rundown here. If we compare the different like contexts you can be in inside GitLab, I'm highlighting groups and projects specifically because that's where users spend a lot of time, and we've grown to have a lot of pages in the sidebar. I frequently see requests to add new pages into the sidebar. These aren't necessarily poor suggestions. It's just we have a lot of things we're trying to add into GitLab. And as a result, it adds a lot of complexity to when users are trying to find the thing that they're looking for. So it might feel like your one thing isn't that big of a deal. And maybe you're right, but one more page to projects could quickly turn into another 50 pages for projects, and we have an even more unruly navigation experience than we have today. And I'm not even including the individual page items that live under settings too. So you tack those on, you can add on to like 10, 15 pages possibly for both groups and projects. And feature flags can add even more complexity to this because there are at least 10 pages that I can think of off the top of my head that are behind a feature flag right now that could appear in the sidebar today, but don't yet. And to take this another step further, when should something be added? Like, what should I look to? Well, I can definitely tell you the existing experience can be misleading. So I'm going to use locked files as an example. This is a feature that was added into GitLab 6 years ago. Not much has been done to it. And it appears as a parent item in the left sidebar in GitLab today. And you might think based off of this, well, the feature I'm working on is kind of like this, so therefore I should add it. I'm not telling you you're wrong for having that assumption. I also have that comparison, like trying to look for examples in the product to follow. We don't want to do this type of thing in the future. We want to avoid creating individual pages. Think about how we want to make features more robust. We want to tightly couple feature functionality where its context is more specific. So locked files is a great example of how we're going to try and integrate that more into the repository page instead of relying on the navigation as a way to just like swap between filtered views essentially. So it does belong there. Unfortunately, the answer is like, it depends. I would say start by thinking about the context. What goes into a project's sidebar is probably going to be different than global search because the intent of working in that context is different. And so we're going to tailor make each of these contexts and their sidebars more specific to where they're being utilized. I would also consider pages that should not be integrated elsewhere. So it probably makes sense to have pipelines separate from merge requests, like they're very independent things, but locked files feels like more of an extension of repositories rather than a distinct function by in and of itself. And in general, I tend to think of keeping the taxonomy of groups very similar to projects. We have a history of introducing things at projects first, typically, and then appearing at groups, but sometimes it happens in reverse order. When users switch between that, I've seen a lot of confusion like, hey, I found this under settings here, but now it's under this folder here, or this feature appears to be in groups, but I can't find it in projects. When things are in different places, I've noticed that we get a lot of feedback around not being able to find where things are. So if you have something that's similar, or the same feature, consider trying to keep those more tightly coupled between the different levels of GitLab. Referring back to a page that we have in Pajamas, there are two specific reasons why we don't add items to the sidebar. We don't do it just to increase discoverability. I know that's hard because you might feel, well, my thing's important. I want people to find it. I agree. Let's look for the right part of the user journey to introduce them to said feature. Sometimes that could be in our sidebar. Sometimes that might be embedded into a page. We don't optimize for the future either. So the analogy I fall back on is like, maybe it's okay that the 4 and 5-year-old share a bunk bed in a room. That's okay for now. Like, we don't have to give them their own individual bedrooms just because they're little and one day they will have one. So we're just trying to find what works right now, and then we can evolve the product as it needs to in the future. And be like, I still know what to do next. That's okay. We have a couple things that can help point you in the right direction. We are updating the handbook right now to better refine our process for helping people understand how to get navigation proposals ready. We are better documenting the navigation patterns for the upcoming design changes around the new navigation. And then we're also putting in docs for implementing these additions. So like one thing that's been really bad in the past is having metrics around user data and how they've been interacting with it. It's going to be a requirement. If you add something in, you're going to have to add tracking to it so that we don't have to go back and do that work again. I've added a few merge requests if you're interested to go see like what Kristen and I are actively working on in terms of expanding upon the documentation. And here's my personal request for everybody. If you're doing something related to navigation, please use tech writing. They can be really instrumental for helping name things that are ambiguous. I would really love to not see any more recommendations or requests to add something with a very ambiguous name title. I think we can be a little bit better about that. And as best you can, please try and validate your solutions before proposing them in a merge request. It's best if you come with evidence either from, it could be customer data, it could be user journey maps that you've created. Like, these things help us understand why things need to be added into the product. And we have some steps outlined in the handbook around user research for how you effectively evaluate a navigation change. So I'm asking you to take great pains to avoid adding things into groups and projects, specifically right now, but in general, navigation. And it's definitely a chore, but like, keep breadcrumbs, page titles, URLs, and documentation up to date. We're currently going through and fixing all those things, and it's just a lot of work to update all those things. It may seem small, but like keeping the sentence casing correct, keeping URLs accurate, these things matter for making sure that users get a consistent experience that looks right. So with that, I'll open up for questions.
Hey, Austin, I've got the first question. Before I get started, I really appreciate all the work that you've done in this area and the conversations that you've had with me async about navigation. But my question is, like, since you're recommending that teams in general should, hold off on adding new pages to our nav, what would you advise for like brand new features and functionality? So, like, for example, as you know, I've been working with the monitor observability team, and they're trying to add something that doesn't currently exist. So what would you advise there?
So that goes back to the slide around it depends. Every single request is a little bit different. Observability is unique because it's bringing in a lot of the functionality that we adopted from OpsTrace. So we're trying to find a way to both help them de-risk their engineering approach of how they integrate the functionality into the product, while also trying to find a way for it to naturally fit into GitLab. So I would say, to me, it feels reasonable to work on things behind a feature flag to ensure that engineering can de-risk those integration pieces. But at the same time, before we turn that on for everybody, we really want to make sure that we have an experience that makes sense for that user journey. I don't have specific insights into what that looks like for the observability features, but I think what we would love to see is evidence that this placement makes sense, that this is how users expect to find it, how they would like to operate within it, and we can kind of go from there. But again, it kind of goes back to, like, I know some things exist with the group and some don't exist with the project. Sometimes it just makes sense to make sure they're both available in the same place. So keep asking the right questions like you're doing now, and we'll just continue to work with the observability team But like I said, like we're really busy just like moving houses essentially. Give us a couple milestones to move houses and we can come back and help refine where things are placed for now.
Okay. Thanks, Austin.
I have the next question, but I'll also use this as an opportunity to back up what Austin is saying specifically about observability. I don't think that we're close enough to a reasonable GA experience in observability to even worry about where it fits in the navigation yet. So we need to focus on helping that team create the right experience. And then we feel like the experience makes sense. Let's make sure, to Austin's point, that we have a business justification for where we add it to the navigation. So that's exactly right, Austin. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, so one of the things I'm excited about with the new navigation, and I'm sorry, I was 3 minutes late because one of my previous meetings ran over. If you covered this already, my apologies. But we're adding a pinned feature to the nav. And I think that could offset some of this, like everything has to go at the most discoverable possible place in the navigation that we've been experiencing. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I won't give away too much of the details on it because I'm still wrapping up the final solution validation deck with Ashley. But in general, our findings were pretty strong in supporting that we should bring forth a solution like this. To your point, Christy, it really is to help users tailor their experience a little bit without having to give them full customization options around GitLab. So we can still be opinionated on how we want to classify things into specific collections, but we can give users a way to create their own shortcuts and paths where they need it. So the example I might give is we may tuck branches under the develop collection, but they may not want to have to go and search through everything. They may have just 5 pages that they frequently visit and they want to pin that into their sidebar. This then adds it above that area. So they'll be able to access those things more quickly and across projects, or in some cases across groups as well, which would mean like, yes, if you're a frequent user of a specific feature, great, pin it for yourself. Then you can always access it and not have to dig for it again.
This is also why Austin's point about talking with tech writing and getting a very specific name is really important. Yep. Because as soon as that item is outside of its section, then it may not be clear what it's about if it's not specific enough. So something to think about moving forward.
Chrissy, if you're good, we'll move on to Erica's point.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if we could like tie in or talk about our definition of an iteration. So kind of I know that we're working on socializing the idea that an iteration is a little more polished than we've been thinking of. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Christy just brought up the point about the GA journey. So maybe my question is moot now. But just this idea of if we can say, let's make sure it's fully ready for GA before it goes into the nav, and then kind of maybe even operationalizing that a bit as we move forward.
Yeah, I have
exactly.
Tori, keep me honest, because you've been part of these conversations. But this is very much how I interpret what Sid has been asking for from us when it comes to navigation. So case in point, we had a new feature that had fewer than 100 users, and we added it at the top level of the navigation. And Sid's very apt point was, why would we do that? Hardly anyone is using this. Hardly anyone needs to find it. This doesn't make sense. Once usage goes up, if we need to shift it up a level, we can always do that in the future, but we have to stop just cramming everything in. So that to me aligns very much with what you're suggesting, Erica. And again, Tori, keep me honest here.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think that ties into like not optimizing for the future, as well as if people are building behind feature flags, then we don't want to just we don't want to merge something behind a feature flag for navigation if there hasn't been a full vision that's been built out yet, because it's so easy to just turn that on and then it's available to everyone. And the full vision hasn't been fleshed out. So we really want to, even if a team is working behind a feature flag, we want to see that vision We want to know what the end state is. What are they building towards before we, add it to the nav?
Yeah, we just want to make sure we're adding depth to the right part of the product. And I'll be honest, it historically has been the easier thing to just add a page where no one else is going to contend with you for space, where you've added a new page title into the navigation. I get it. That was easy. But now that we're trying to be more diligent about how we add into the product, it does take some more upfront work. So yeah, I'm asking for more upfront work for how we introduce new things or additions into GitLab.
And I think that this is what I'm using to socialize my teams on this idea, but that's actually more DevOps friendly, right? Because we want to be embedding the paths into their current workflow versus taking them out, context switching into the nav, and then having them to go back. So maybe that's something to think about with our definition of done is like, have we played out every place in the current workflow where we could add ways to get into the feature before we do the last resort of going to the nav.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot.
Austin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the doc updates that you and Kristen are working on, it does have something that says like you have explored other options and like list what those options were. So something that's outside of the nav to make sure people are thinking about other pathways. Is that right?
Yep, I do think there's a bullet in there for that. If there's not, it's going to be added into possibly like the issue template that we're building for it.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of those questions. And I think we're getting close on time too. So we'll end it there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Austin. This has been really great and helpful.
Yeah, hopefully help somebody else too that watches the async.